Hi, everybody. Welcome to the new normal. I'm your host, Lisa Davis, aka Litecoin Lisa, and today we are going to have some historical references to Rebellion and Revolt, brought to you by the one and only Emperor of Den.social and the Den DAO, the wonderful one and only I am, for I am, and but it doesn't have to be this way. So we're going to see what he has to say right after this. Give us a like, share the video, and join us in the live chat right after this. Welcome back. Good to have you.
Good to be here. Good to be here. How are you and the family and everyone in the chat?
We are well. We are well. Yes.
Marvelous Monday. Tomorrow's terrific Tuesday. I got a word for each one. Wonderful Wednesday.
We're going to keep it going. We're going to keep it going.
That's right. That's right. Oh, Lisa, I don't know. The world is a changing. It's changing quickly, faster than we thought it would, I think.
I hope so.
But yeah, and change is good. Sometimes we don't want to embrace it or accept it, but I think what was that quote last week? Something about until the pain gets too great, you'll change. If pain will force a change on you, I guess. So I don't know with these riots in LA and all that. I was just planning a trip there.
Oh wow.
Just kidding.
I hope not.
No. No, have no desire to go back to California for anything. I don't think there's anything there for me. No.
Yeah, I saw them bringing in the Marine health.
Oh yeah.
And I said, well, I guess they're bringing the FO, engaging the FO on the FAFO part. And then I saw somebody else saying, I guess LA has really forgotten when they were talking about rioting or peacefully protesting at Camp Pendleton, and they apparently forgot what Camp Pendleton did for them during the Rodney King riots and
right.
all of that, and what how much the military has been there for LA, and just who has been there to look out and protect the people of LA.
That's right.
Kind of things. So
let me close these blinds here. I think they're like casting light on.
Yeah.
Got 3 sets here in our library media room or whatever.
Yeah.
The sun's starting to hit me. That's better. A little bit.
Yeah, they're good. Yeah.
Maybe get this one. I didn't turn on all my lights, Lisa.
I do love a history lesson. Yes, we need some light. Put a little light on the subject.
There we go. That's right. So before we all board our planes and go through TSA to fly to Los Angeles to watch the fun, I thought we'd go down memory lane a little bit and kind of do part 2 of last week's post-labor economics, where we see AI taking over everything, and robotics is growing faster than you think, and what it's capable of doing. And so I thought, before we jump on the plane and go find out what's happening in Los Angeles, let's just stroll down memory lane and take a look at all that stuff. What do you think?
I love history.
History rhymes, so must be some kind of rhyming action that's happening with the AI and the robots and all that. So let's do it.
Okay.
So here's our thumbnail for tonight's show. It's kind of like post-labor economics part 2, because it doesn't have to be that way. And the question always is, well, have we lived this before? And I got the image there of the robot, being shattered by an angry mob and wires hanging out and the glass is broken. And then we have three images of the past, where, who knows? Are we going to revolt in the streets and destroy AI and robotics and data centers? Has this kind of thing happened in the past? And that's what I thought we would talk about, and how it doesn't have to be that way. So we don't know what our future is, but we do know our past, or some of us do, or we can learn from our past, right? So I don't know if this person, this window is coming or going, but anyway, let's take a look into our past a little bit. There was this movement in 1811 to 1816, and it happened in England, and it's called the Luddite movement. And the people were called Ludies. And it was based off of actually a mythical creature that lived in the woods, in the mountains, and they called themselves Ludies. And what was interesting was they were losing their jobs to new machinery, and so they started rebelling and started destroying the machinery. Well, what were the jobs and what were they losing? These were skilled weavers. And, way back in the day, everything's all by hand, and they didn't have these massive looms or what would power them. And so that automation started coming. We had the cotton gin and everything. And so people started getting better with their technology and developing ways to, weave clothing or blankets or whatever. And these knitting frames and these mechanical devices became faster, cheaper, and they could produce more than people could. And people started losing their jobs. Well, in England, they rose up and they started destroying all of this equipment. And these ludies or lutettes or ludettes, like I said, it was based off this mythical creature by the name of Ned Ludd, and he lived in the forest of like Nottingham, and he was directing them to go crush these machines that are crushing you. Go destroy them before they destroy you and your family, because this is how you make your living. And that's what they did. They actually went and destroyed thousands of these machines, and it grew all over England. And this rebellion, if you will, against the machine was happening in 1811. And it continued and till the government had to get involved. And this is in old England. So the British government started cracking down on these ludies. And they started deploying troops to protect the equipment. And then they passed a law called the Frame Breaking Act of 1812. You can't break the frames. But it came with a severe punishment, Lisa. You couldn't believe this. Some were executed, some were imprisoned. Now, can you imagine being imprisoned in 1816 or 1811? God knows what that was like, right?
Well, and to think they were being killed for that, like that's pretty significant.
Right. Well, it was destroying their whole industry, and it was destroying, who do you think owned these equipment, these machines?
Yeah. The Rothschilds.
Those who had the power, right? Those who had the control over the politicians.
Yeah.
Those who could pay to have the laws written and passed and the enforcement carried out. So this is how, old England took care of the loots or the ludies. Now think about it. Back in that time, were they successful? Even if there wasn't like this massive government response, they wouldn't have been successful, because other countries eventually would have been creating these massive machine looms and the frames to create all these things. And so even if they were successful for a little while or even decades, eventually the machinery was going to catch up and take over their jobs. It was inevitable. So we have to think of it that way, even though we don't like the idea what the government did. Okay. Well, did that kind of thing happen over here? Well, it did, but it didn't catch on quite as much. And in the 1830s, 1840s, there were protests having to do with textiles and manufacturing of textiles, kind of the same thing as the lutes or the luties in England. And it was, 20, 30 years later, but they didn't really organize very well. And they were known as the Mill Girls, and it happened in Massachusetts. And they were also skilled artisans. They were weavers, and they are protesting again against these automated looms, these knitting frames. And, because all that knitting is extremely intensive. And when you can have a machine do it, again, just like last week we talked about, why do companies invest in robots and AI? It's faster, cheaper. That's really what it comes down to.
Right.
It's faster, cheaper, better, or more accurate, or higher quality. And so these low mill workers started vandalizing the machinery. And they actually formed a union. They were one of the first unions in this country. But it stayed and remained mostly a local incident. It didn't have widespread spread riots. So because it was kind of a smaller industry and a smaller niche in that part of our country, it really didn't catch on. So what was the government response? Well, there really wasn't much other than just locally. The local police got involved, the local sheriff, this kind of thing. And this is the other learning point that we can learn. How did they solve this? What did they do? What were their concessions? What was the company's concessions? Well, the company's concessions is, we'll keep you employed, but we're going to reduce your salaries by 15 to 20%. That was the response. And the mill girls agreed to that, to maintain and keep their jobs. So there was no local laws that were passed or federal laws. The federal government said, no. This is a state thing, or this is a local thing. We're not getting involved in this. You guys handle that yourselves. The federal government was basically null, and it wasn't going to get involved in labor disputes at all. It was light years away from that kind of action. So again, this, even though it was having an impact locally, it didn't branch out elsewhere. So there were workers that were fired, they were blacklisted, but only really local authorities like the police got involved. So next we have, which is more of a labor union dispute rather than technology, but there was technology involved, and it was called the Great Railroad Strike. And what they did was, these railroad workers were starting to lose their jobs to better locomotives. It could pull more cars. It would require less people. The switches, all of these kinds of things, this technology started growing. So what did they do? They started seeing reduction in the labor force. They needed less workers. These railroad barons started cutting wages and cutting personnel. Well, there was a major rebellion, and it actually was a strike all over the nation. And it got ugly. Next thing you know, and you can see in the pictures here, that rail cars were starting to get burned down, destroyed, locomotives getting destroyed. People were, this was getting ugly. It was getting much more violent. And lives were starting to get lost, where people were starting to die during these protests, these riots, this fight for, the labor movement. The police were outnumbered, so they started getting more of a militia and asking the governors to get involved and send in the military. West Virginia didn't have enough military, like a National Guard, to send in from a state level, so they asked for federal troops. Federal troops, guess what? Here's your government response. By the way, this was, again, faster, cheaper machine production because it became a nationwide strike, and these rail technologies was cutting jobs. And what ended up happening was the government's response was stepped up. It just kept increasing and increasing. And the other side kept increasing. So both sides started getting militias put together. And these raids on equipment were happening at night, where it was more difficult to protect and police the equipment. And the equipment, think of it on a rail cars and the railway, backed up for miles. How are you going to protect this equipment? So local militias formed, and some of them actually sympathized with the strikers. And so the state and local were having difficulty finding people to support them because they were siding on the workers' side. So governors ended up having to really bring in larger scale militias to fight these riots. And some say that, hundreds died. There's others that say that, more than 1,000 died during this period, during these strikes. It's really hard to say. But here's where our federal government really stepped in. President Hayes was the president at the time, and he justified it based off of the Commerce Clause. He said that these strikes, because they were now nationwide, were affecting interstate commerce. And it was extremely detrimental to the economy, to people, to other people that need to travel, or granary, or farmers, goods that were going to spoil, and all these things. So he justified military action on U.S. citizens and a heavy hand to end this fight, this strike, this rebellion. And it worked. There was concessions by the workers. There was some concessions by the railroad magnates and the large railroad companies. But the heavy-handedness actually prevailed in the end. The small local militias just didn't have the capability or the numbers to fight. And it was kind of on all sides kind of calmed down after, I think, blood was shed. So that's to give you an idea. So we see from England, we saw, capital punishments, executions for striking workers and destroying equipment. In the US, fast forward, 50 years, 70 years, and now you see a president getting involved based off of the Interstate Commerce Clause. To allow the military to go up against their own citizens. So that was how it was responded back then. So now, today, we're looking at white-collar job loss in our future, in our near future. And some people, have already may have been laid off or have had to change their maybe their majors in college or go back to school or whatever. But there is talk that by 2030, and this is old, that 20 to 30% of current white collar jobs will be eliminated by 2030. That's 5 years from now. There's another person who was one of the vice presidents of Google on their tech side, and he says that we're going to see 20, 30% of white collar being eliminated especially in finance, law, marketing, and admin jobs within 1 to 2 years from today. So by 2027, we're going to see at least a 30%, a minimum of 30% of white collar jobs. The question is, will white collar people rise up and revolt and rebel like we've seen in the past? I don't know. They are a different type of, personality, if you will. But nonetheless, we're going to see this group in the labor force be really hit hardest and quick from the loss of jobs. And this is going to translate into they're the ones who might have mortgages and car loans and a higher standard of living than others, and they are going to be forced into really radically downsizing, just to keep a roof over their head or to feed their families or what have you. And that's going to affect their young as well. Those that are, trying to look for a job, maybe in their first job in high school or something like that, because these white collar folks might have to be forced into those jobs. So we're going to see youth unemployment start to increase dramatically, and those entry level jobs go away. And this is going to bring about higher probability of a recession. Now, I would argue that we've probably already been in a recession. They just keep changing the definition and changing the data so they don't, unemployment is higher than what it really is. And this has been going on for administration after administration.
Yeah,
but
they just
when
stop
you
wanting people. Yeah.
So when the youth, when these white collar jobs are gone and the youth can't go into even beginner type white collar jobs and are frustrated because the parents of their friends are taking over entry level jobs just to try to stay afloat, we're going to see the youth getting more volatile, and who knows what they'll do. So the key triggers for this situation, and it's going to float into all kinds of jobs that we're not even thinking of right now, because humanoid robots are learning at such an exponential rate that, like I talked about last week, if you told the robot, how to open up a jar of vitamins and open it up and take one out, it's now watching this, and then it's doing after watching you do it. So the training, rather than each line of code being written, is being written by the AI by watching and observing, and then by trial and error learning how to do it. And once the first robot has learned, then the next one and the next one learn instantly, because the data is transferred. The code, shall we say, for each line of code has been transferred. So it's been exponential growth of these robots. So if white collar sectors start losing 15-20% within 2 to 3 years, we're going to see a lot more pain in the streets that's going to be forcing, are they going to take up arms against these robots or the AIs, the data centers, like we've seen in the past, like I just illustrated here? Will governments be slow to react and creating different types of safety nets? Are we going to look to the government for safety nets? More than likely, yes, unfortunately, because we've been programmed, or most of society has been programmed to look to the government for solutions before we look to the church and our community and our neighbors and our family. And now we just go straight to government. But we're going to start seeing visible wealth gaps. And we're going to see the blue collar jobs exceed the white collar jobs, because those are going to be the slowest to be converted into robotic AI.
Right.
And everyone says
labor jobs are going to be way more valued. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And they're harder to train a robot to do. You might be able to train a robot to sit on a lawnmower and mow a lawn in a large field, but it would be a little bit more difficult to have a lawnmower being pushed by a robot, but not impossible. Or maybe drywall, or replacing a light fixture, or installing a light fixture. These kinds of things are going to be taught by a humanoid robot. If a humanoid robot can break an egg and scramble an egg in a pan or on the stove, when you start thinking of the fine-tuned mechanisms to be able to do those things, and to observe the cooking and watch it, and maybe over easy or over medium or over hard, and to be able to do those types of things, handling a spatula, that seems so minor and small to us. But that spatula becomes, something, a device maybe to, in changing oil on a vehicle, changing a tire, roadside service, all kinds of different things come to mind. And what you're going to see is the robot companion to the human, and you're going to see when the humanoid robot can be, purchased at less than $300 a month, because you can buy them for $8,000, and you could have a loan out for $300 a month for 36 months, and it's yours. You're going to see these things pretty soon, like it's been estimated, 15 years from now, 55 billion humanoid robots in the world. Maybe it's 20 years from now.
They were already using the dog bots at these LA riots that they're showing. I'm just going to close my window now.
Go for it.
The window's blinding me here.
Yeah. And while you're doing that, we're going to see visible, like I said, we're going to see visible wealth gaps. And the tech billionaires are going to come out fine. And what they're going to do is they're going to gather more and more technology, and they're going to definitely be a bigger, bolder haves than the have-nots. And workers are going to suffer. So we've seen this before, and we're going to see it again. So the other key triggers to riots is, like I said, when unemployment for the youth, it starts exceeding 40% in urban centers, they become restless and they become hooligans. Yeah, I'm being nice. I'm trying to be careful with my words here, but they're bored and they get into trouble. They look for trouble. And we're going to see, X and other social media platforms, they're going to start talking about, we need to take action against this AI that's losing jobs. We're losing our jobs to these robots and AI. And that this is going to be a repeat of, the loots or the looties. Way back in the day in England, when the weavers, the artisan weavers, were losing their jobs to machinery. It's going to be the same thing all over again. And, it's easier to take a bat to a machine than it is to take a bat to a person, and fight a person, because it's a machine. It's not a living, breathing thing. And there is going to be, I anticipate, unless there's something to replace the loss of income and the loss of pride of who we are, because we define ourselves by the jobs we do, we're going to see rebellion. We're going to see riots. We're going to see all kinds of triggers. And we're going to see different local governments handle it differently. We're going to see local governments that say, I support the worker because they want to get reelected. We're going to protect workers' jobs, and we're going to ban robots for this particular job or this particular AI, and they're going to ban it. But in today's world, just like I mentioned, in 1811 in England, even if they were successful of eliminating these mechanical looms and frames that, wove fabric into blankets and sheets, it's going to be done elsewhere.
Right. It's coming anyway. Yeah.
A local government or state, or even a nation state, is not going to be able to stop this. And we have to think this through, because if we try to stop it here, another country is going to continue on. And are they going to get to AGI first? Or are they going to be able to undercut our productivity and our way we handle different things? Or are we going to be the innovative ones to create more robots and have ownership in these robots and these, that get deployed in other countries? And that's kind of where we have to start thinking of change rather than the pain and suffering. The carriage was replaced by the automobile, and the Pony Express was replaced, and all the things, airplanes and air travel, people get replaced. Old, equipment gets replaced by new equipment because it's better, it's cheaper, it's faster. And we now are going to be the actual job, performers. Our labor is going to be replaced. So we have to think it through.
Well, to even apply that to today's situation, I
Hmm.
saw the female president of Mexico, and she was speaking out because part of the big beautiful bill they were talking about changing. There's a remittance tax that right now I think they have it at like 3.5, and they're talking about changing it to 15%. And she was telling them to riot for the Mexicans in the U.S. to riot against. She said because she wants the workers that are here. She said, I'm not going to let them charge 15% on the money coming into my country. She knows they come here to work cheap, to
Hmm.
send our money back to her country, and
Hmm.
she's pissed off about the 15% remittance tax. So she knows the cheaper, faster, um, it's not a bot, it's a person,
Right.
that it's coming, and she is calling for riots here in America by her citizens in our country, an invasion of our country. And
Right.
to me, that's an act of war.
Oh,
That's an
I would agree with
invasion
you
in our
too.
war.
And again, there's a solution: better, cheaper, faster. How about converting your money into Litecoin or
Right,
into Xano or something, or Monero, and transferring it that way, and skipping the remittance. And this
right.
is where technology is better, faster, cheaper.
Yeah,
It's
but you
cheaper
don't
because
call for
you can go
violence.
under the taxation of the remittance and still continue. I'm not con- condoning or encouraging that behavior. I'm just saying
Right.
that there are technological solutions
Yeah.
that are moving at a faster pace that where government can stop. And next, now to address the other issue, if we were to do the same in her country, she
Mhm,
would be outraged.
mhm.
Um, and this is where traveling abroad becomes dangerous because you're an American citizen, irregardless if you've renounced your citizenship, or you left America because you didn't believe in certain policies. Maybe your policies aligned with the president of Mexico's policies. I don't know. But
Right.
my point being, you know, they're not going to see that. They're
Mm,
only going to see you as the American citizen because you were born and raised in America, and they're
right.
going to take it out on you. And so then it becomes local to you, irregardless of where you're at. And the same applies for them. And this is where the concept of the idea of this is where I disagree with the libertarian movement in that there should be no borders. No, borders are there to protect our culture and our way of life, and there's all kinds of reasons to protect ourselves for our security. You know, so remittance back to other countries from this country is huge. It's huge. Um, it's a big part of their economy. It's
Mhm.
almost like you could almost say in some countries, it's like our tourist economy. For them, it would replace their tourist economy because
Well,
it's their workers that are working abroad and sending their money back home.
yeah.
So it's that is kind of like what we did to Japan. We isolated Japan. We didn't allow them to have oil and other trade, and so we're isolating the remittance coming back to their country. So it's an act of war on both sides, if you will.
Mm,
I don't side with her, and I'm trying to present both sides of the argument and trying to be
sure.
objective here.
Mhm.
But um, I guess where I'm going with that whole point, because the first thing that came to mind was again technology. Technology, there's a way to skirt that. You could block all the remittance you want, but you know what? Cryptocurrencies have no borders. It's borderless. That's the whole point. And governments haven't realized that, or they or have the ability right now to stop it from the bank account. You know,
Mhm.
so it's just a thought. It's something to think
No,
about.
you're
But
right, but, then it makes you wonder, do they want the solution? And
right,
most
good
likely
point.
not. Yeah, they want
Good
the
point.
control, but
And so what we're up against here, which is we always talk about this, and I mentioned it last week, we want the giant reset. We want all the corruption gone. We want a reset. We want the deficit gone. We want a reset. the whole concept of the change from, an agrarian society to an industrial society, that was a reset. And when we switched into, the nuclear age was a reset. It was a different form of energy. We didn't take it to the fourth and fifth generation, and make it more local and safe and secure. And maybe, instead we went down the weapon path, and started generating electricity, even using the weapon side of the, but it's a different way of, then the internet was a new revolution, a revelation, or a whole change, in the way information is shared. And look at it's what it's brought about too, a blockchain. And like our example, it's, remittance taxes can be avoided with a few clicks of a mouse now. So technology is always going to be ahead of government, and technology is always going to be ahead of taxation. And technology can make our lives much better and much more comfortable if we allow it, and if it's done properly. So here's a couple of quick things real quick. Moore's law, they say is about 18 to 24 months, where AI was every 6 months. And now they're saying it's maybe every 3 months, and it's doubling in its capabilities. And robotics is basically the same. So they measure it in two ways. They measure it by what's called flops and teps. Flops is floating point operations per second. And this is in the trillions. Before, just, in 2012, it wasn't even at 100,000, flops. And they're already at 1 trillion flops now.
Interesting. Okay.
Now, let me put it in perspective in flops. You could almost say that a human brain is about at 100 trillion flops. Okay.
So this is the growth, or
this is the growth.
Okay.
So if from 2012 at 100,000, at the lowest level of, you couldn't even really call it AI then, but fast forward to today, and it's gone from 100,000 to 1 trillion in flops. Okay. Where the human brain is at 100 trillion. So right now it's at 100 to 1. The human brain does far more, calculations, all of its movements, all of the synapses firing, telling your heart to beat, telling your finger to move, telling my mouth to talk, to think of the word, to bring the word to, fruition, and to discuss it here. This is where I'm talking about kind of how that human brain is at. So it's at roughly 100 trillion flops. And if AI is doubling now every 3 months, and it's at 1 trillion, we're only a couple of years away from the AI to exceed the human brain's capability in flops. The other way they measure it is TEPS, which is traversed edges per second. I'm not going to get down in the weeds and all of that.
Okay.
But in other words, what I'm trying to just explain here is that they have a way of measuring its growth, and it's far exceeding Moore's law. And Moore's law is kind of where we've always pointed to, the growth of computer power, memory storage, and all of these things. All right. Well, the brain, though, at that 100 trillion flops, it only takes 20 watts. Where GPT or a data center eventually would require, unless they come up with it, and energy wise, it would take up 2% of the global electricity requirements in the world. But this was done before DeepSeek, because, and this is also why China is so crazy about generating electricity in so many ways, because they're also in a big race for these massive data centers that require so much energy, because they're trying to get the flops up and bring the energy costs down. We as humans are amazing, efficient with 20 watts and do, all of those flops to maintain our movements and our heart beating and our breathing, and the AI and the robot is limited by stuff of, say battery, as well as how much its AI brain is going to draw and how long will it last. So really, and remember, Moore's law was a lot slower, decades ago. It was much slower than 24 months. So but AI, if we're at under 6 months, then 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see how flops now, just by using flops as a measurement tool, it's going to exceed our human capacity, as well as have all of that information at its fingertips or internalized. We can right now go to the internet and we can look up anything. We can search it up and we can get a simple calculation, ounces into cups or whatever. But AI is going to have that already instantly, rather than a recall function of us. So this AI and the human robot is what I'm trying to impress upon everybody to understand is it's here to stay unless there's some kind of massive electrical problem with the world. Hint, hint, a solar CME. Mm-hmm. It's here to stay. It is the looms of 1811 replacing all of those artisan weavers. It is here, and it's growing at a fast pace, just like the driverless car. So that brings us again back into post-labor economics, where we could have a hyperabundance, which just means that all post-labor economics means is that instead of trading labor for money or wages, we no longer trade labor for wages. Jobs become voluntary. We don't identify ourselves by the career or job that we have anymore. That's what post-labor economics is. And it's a giant shift. It's a giant leap for some to understand, but that's where we're going if we're going to look into our future. And again, I say that we're going to switch more into instead of labor, we're going to switch into capital. So our income's going to come from the capital that we invest in. And UBI won't work because the US economy, keep this number in mind, we'll just call it $30 trillion. All of the dollars that are traded in a year for anything and everything, the whole economy, government included, all the governments included in the US is $29 trillion. All right. And the US budget is $7 trillion right now. And we're spending $2 trillion more than we're receiving, about $5 trillion, just in raw numbers. There's 260 million adults in this country. Now, not all of them are going to get replaced all at once with, a robot or AI. But let's just assume that, Lisa, you and I would have a very difficult time trying to live on $1,000 a month, covering our roof, our food, just for ourselves. Forget our families, forget our children, forget our grandkids, whatever. Just as an individual and adult, it would be very difficult at $1,000. It'd be very difficult, especially in different places of the country, to even survive at $2,000 a month. So let's just, for shits and grins, let's just call it $2,000 as the safety net. If every adult in the US job was replaced or was receiving in a form of maybe Social Security or disability payments or whatever was their income stream from the government or all levels of government equal $2,000 a month, that would be $6.24 trillion, $6.25 trillion. So if you add that to the budget, then our new federal budget would be $13 trillion. It would be more than double what we're doing right now. Right. Almost. Wow. You hear all the sirens?
I do. You can hear. Yeah, I can hear.
They're coming for me, Lisa.
You better lock your door. Don't answer it.
So that's a lot of money. And obviously, if you're going to give all this money out, where's the money going to come back to replace it to the government? they can't just endlessly print it, right?
I don't know.
Well, yeah, who knows? Well, the point being is if the whole economy is $29 trillion and then 13 trillion is going to be UBI and our current federal spending, um, that's 1/3 of the total economy is the federal government. I can't imagine living in a world like that. So UBI just isn't going to solve it. It's not long term. Maybe you could do it for a half a year or a year. I don't know. But the inflation on the other side of it, the next year would be just insane. So UBI is not a solution. Maybe it's a temporary gap. Again, comes back to residual income streams. We got to have multiple income streams. And the temporary government UBI may have to come in and then be weeded out. And as we start developing other income streams, and we went over this graph last week,
Yeah, this is
where
interesting.
the green is the other, all of the different forms of income that we would come in that far right, the far right block or graph. So very little of it comes from labor and very little it comes from government. In other words, and I want to dig into this, in other words, that $30 trillion that's being spent in the economy, we all are going to take possession of it. We're going to start having ownership in that $30 trillion to replace the UBI or to replace our incomes. And that is where the capital is. That's where the income stream comes in, is we will have ownership in that 30 trillion rather than look to the government to get a piece of that 30 trillion, and then funnel it down to us. No. What we're talking about here is in a post-labor economy that, like I have in the graph here, the other becomes the majority of our income levels, our income streams, comes from thousands of different sources and in small, minute levels. And it's called micro investment. So, an example, I go to the store or go online and I buy, I don't know, I buy this zinc. Okay. I got blood or whatever. This zinc for my health. And I happen to like this brand and I buy it. And so now maybe, when you check out at the checkout and it says, would you like to round up for charity, or what if the people that were selling it for at that time, I had the option to put 50 cents or $1 into this company that I happen to like and trust. And then I have ownership in that company. And so now you're getting, and then on the next item and the next item and the next item, and maybe I like Kleenex boxes or something, I don't know. And what happens is your ownership slowly starts increasing in all these different companies. And maybe that's the mom and pop, store that you want to frequent. We had a semi chain store that was our pet food store that we went to, and it recently was going to close or restructured, and the employees, and they got some investors together and they bought it from the company. Well, I want to go there because I want to support the little guy, the little store, the store owner. So I'm going to go there now and buy all of our dog food and dog toys and cat food and all that from them. Well, what if they had an offer for an NFT or an ownership? So every time I bought, whatever dog medicine or something, and I could have ownership. And then on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis, I get dividends. And I'm getting reports based off of how well they're doing. And I could sell the NFT. And so the 30 trillion becomes our world. Think of the 30 trillion economy. Now we have shares in that in numerous ways. We have, employee ownership. Employee ownership is huge, but employee ownership is only a piece of it. And if we're no longer going to be working for a company, we're going to want to start diversifying our income streams. We want numerous income streams. And then you and I, Lisa, we start talking about, wow, I really like, PLC dog vitamin chews or something like that. And we talk about it and we tell our friends and neighbors about it and they start buying it. Or, well, this company did me wrong, so I'm going to boycott them, and here's why. And people start selling their shares because we vote with our wallets. And we not only now take our voting with our wallet to a next level, we're taking it to a much more personal level of, hey, don't you mess with my money. This is how I feed my family. And when you start thinking in those terms of having ownership in the entire $30 trillion, and rather than the government taking the ownership and just pushing out, $2,000 a month per person, like in a UBI scenario, this is, I think, is going to how others are writing about this idea, this concept of having ownership. Like I said, the robot at $300 a month, all of us neighbors could go in and buy it, and it could have a piece of that, and we could put that robot to work at other job sites, earning more than $300 a month plus maintenance or whatever, and getting a little bit of income. So next thing you know, you got all these different streams of income, and that's how the world turns into a much more not trading labor for wages, but you have capital investments, even at the micro level, $1, $5, $10, $100, whatever you can afford, and you've diversified into thousands of different avenues, and that's how you start getting that. So it's called micro investing, and there's a lot of laws that have to change for this to happen. And there's going to be counties and cities and states that are going to start saying, you know what, this is a better safety net. And we'll be able to invest in that. Maybe the county's going to have a big project. I don't know, bad scenario, a prison. And we're all going to invest in the prison to lock up the people who have done others wrong or something. And it generates, some kind of income from it. I don't know.
That's what I could see as a community choosing to operate this way or live this way, and then it growing into, towns or groups doing this. Because like even in our homeschool community, so one way that you can help to offset cost of your homeschool fees is that you can be a teacher or a tutor, they call it, because the parents are teachers, but you can be a tutor and facilitate the classes that during the co-op day, and that offsets some of the cost, a lot of the cost of your tuition. And so that's another way of micro investing in your child's education that offsets the cost you're investing in the community effort. And then that way, you're being part of the homeschool community or the effort or whatever. And you're investing in your child's education, all this. And so I could see like a town doing that. In fact, we did a World Blockchain Roundtable episode. I don't know if you were there for that one. I feel like you were. If not, you were in the chat or did questions, I'm sure. But we talked about using a DAO and having maybe I taught homeschool, so in lieu of paying taxes, but maybe somebody else had a lot of capital, and so they paid taxes, but then they didn't have to shovel snow or teach school in the community. And so it was a way of how would you use a DAO, and how would you run a city with different people contributing in different ways, and multiple streams of income kind of thing. And everybody, contributing equally or but in different ways,
Right.
So it's
exactly. And contract work is a good example too, where there's all these different gigs or contracts, and what's going to happen is you're going to have robots that you're going to train to do certain gigs or contract work, and people are going to start training them. You're going to have a skill like, I don't know, framing a home, and you're going to frame the house, and you're going to have a robot next to you, just like it was a person that you're training to take over that job. And I think it's it's hard for some people, especially in the trades, because that's even further out to see it, but it's going to happen. And it's 1811 all over again with the Ludies.
Yeah.
with
Well, it's
the
also thinking about that the community itself has
Mhm.
great resources that then everyone in the community would benefit from, that there's
Right.
assets, in the land, the natural gas, the water, the energy, all this. Thorian's asking a question. I retire in 4 years, get 59% of my salary the rest of my life. What if I use that for my own personal robot with AI? Is that an option?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are all going to be faced with those questions. Um, it's one is how do I, what should I invest in? Um, how can I, prepare for this change to a post-labor economics? Is it going to happen as fast as I am for Am says? I don't know. I'm going on based off of what others say. Um, uh, and and what we're it's kind of funny that Thuran, and thanks for a good question, Thuran. Here, think of it this way: many of us have seen or have bought and used the robot sweepers in your home that
Yeah.
have a docking station, and the first ones would just kind of go around and spin, and they'd hit, and it was random. The next ones, people hated emptying those things all the time, especially if you have a you know um, cats or dogs and a lot of hair, and you had to empty it. And then they came up with it would vacuum up and suck it all up. And then the next thing you know, it plans out your home. It knows that this couch is always at this location in the corner, and it's just going to go around that couch and the dining room table or whatever. And that technology has expanded and grown dramatically in the last five years. Not let's not even talk about where's the data going, because now
Right.
SWAT knows my house layout all the way down to my furniture. Forget
Right.
all of that. But the technology of a small round disc running in your house, vacuuming and cleaning is where it's going. But it's going at an exponential rate, and pretty soon it's going to be more of a kind of like in Star Wars, C3PO is walking and R2D2 is just on wheels rolling around.
Mhm.
And there's going to be all kinds of functionality. And we're going to have decisions like, I talked to my wife, should we buy this robot for, and try it out and test it out and see if it picked up the dog hair so we don't have to sweep every day, And sure enough, we buy one, wow, $500 is a lot of money. Well, now you can get them for $200. Oh, pretty soon you can get them for $100. You know what I mean? And the $120,000 humanoid robot is going to go all the way down to $8,000 within a year or two, and they're going to become everywhere. They're not going to be able to build them fast enough, and they're going to learn so much so quick. And then there's all of the, kids are going to be excited to start training a robot to do a new thing, and just like they started playing with the personal computer in the day and created games on the game, on the computer by coding the game. Well, they're going to start coding and training robots. Watch, lift my hand this way and do this, and look, I taught my robot how to play poker. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Thuran is right in that we're going to see decisions like that, and we're going to be able to use those things to make our lives much more comfortable. But first, we're going to have to start thinking about how can I replace my income? How can I start developing these different, seeds coming back to me? Where can I plant my seeds in micro investing for it to come back to me? And that's where it's all going to go. And again, the idea of micro investing is getting it self-reliance. We're not looking to the government for our safety net, and the scalability of the platforms is also important, because we're going to have to, laws are going to have to be changed to accept this, or we're just not going to ask for permission. We're just going to do it. And this is places like Xano and Monero come in, because guess what? they're not asking for permission. They're borderless, and they're going to come in and they're going to scale and become, income streams that are under the radar, shall we say. And people will do desperate things or do things to make a living, to feed their kids or pay for their medicine or maintain that roof over their head, whatever it is, they're going to do those things. And if it means scaling into Xano or something and doing it under the radar, I don't know, but that's possible. But it could also mean an economic boost to our country, because if we all start investing in all these little companies to buy different things, whatever, then those companies are going to start receiving investments, and some are going to fail, and some are going to have more money to buy back. Maybe they're going to want to buy back your shares at a higher amount than what you originally paid for.
Or they'll be able to innovate and create new products that are better or new, or
exactly. And then we're going to tell our friends, and we're all going to want to invest. And this is how the economy grows, based off of capital investment rather than labor, and based off of AI being agents out there doing the work for us, and robots doing the work for us. And that could be a golden age for us, where it becomes a new age of abundance, because we're no longer having to work and labor for our income. We're putting our money to work for us, even at the micro level, even at the small level. Well, I could barely squeak out $20 to invest this month. That's fine, or, I don't have $20 to invest this month. Well, this is where the safety net, the UBI, is going to come in. And maybe you're going to be rated based off of, okay, all right, your UBI investment is $1,800 this month, and $200's got to go towards micro investing, and who knows what it is, so that you start weeding yourself off of UBI. And people are going to start talking about these things and micro investing, and we're going to push our legislatures, to accept this level of investing to replace our jobs, so that we can transition with that less pain, with less blood on the streets, with less violence of taking it out on the machine, and transition from a labor economy to a post-labor economy. And I think it's possible for a new age.
Yeah, they'll have to get rid of the accredited investor thing.
Yes,
they'll have to allow it for everyone,
Otherwise, it's just going to be Xano, and Xano, you be converted into anything. Can be converted into Litecoin or Bitcoin or whatever, and it's untrackable, untraceable.
Yeah, that works.
Because that's what Xano's out. Xano is trying to be like the Ethereum, but in the privacy world. So who knows? And there's going to be more than just Xano. There's going to be other Xanos, and there's going to be, like I said, this whole thing with Mexico and remittance. The technology exists right now to shut both sides up and say, we don't need your permission.
We don't need any of it. Yeah.
You can tax it all you want. It doesn't matter. You're not going to tax it, because it's going to go under, just like they came under the fence or over the fence. It's going to go under the fence or over the fence back. Oh, crazy. But it is potential. We have the potential of this reset to becoming the reset that we want on our own terms. And it's going to be up to us. And you know what? There are those who make things happen, and those who wonder what happened, those who just watch things happen. And this is a golden age of potential for us to make things happen and to do a reset how we see fit. It's voting with our wallets. It matches my agorism spirit.
Yes. So we can do this without violence, I think, is the biggest, strongest point. So we can make the choice for us. Thank you. I love it. I love all the information. And I love when you bring history into the conversation. I think that's an important, because we can learn from that and we can make the choice. So
oh no, Lisa.
Oh,
I missed my plane to LA.
That's all right.
The plane already took off. I was supposed to wrap this up in 10 minutes so I could get to the airport and fly to Los Angeles tonight.
It's probably for the best.
Oh, well.
I think it's for the best.
Maybe the riots will continue.
All right, you guys. Everybody stay safe out there, and we will see you tomorrow. All right. Take care.